within the minute.
The New York Times article had some interesting things, but the first thing that struck me, which I'd love to be able to get an answer to this, is that it immediately implied that the office at the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, that organization he was referring to, that Rubio was referring to, was an extension of ATIP, that ATIP closed down and then something was set up over at ONI. I really doubt that. I think that that group at ONI that's doing serving the issue has been there a long time, and that Rubio essentially outed it, probably deliberately, in the text of that bill. By the way, that there would be no ET related item in that bill if Rubio didn't want it. And so Marco is positioning himself. Clever man. And he's not up for re-election, I don't think, this time. And the bill obviously doesn't require a response until probably the middle of next year. So Rubio is nicely positioned if things do break next year in early February, say. Clever move on his part. We'll take it, and it helped trigger the New York Times article. But I'd like to know exactly what the history is of the entity at ONI.
I have clarification on that too.
Steve, it's Melinda.
Yes.
Steve, it's Melinda, and I have a couple of things to say to you about that I can answer some of those based upon three, including today, but three recent conversations with Jim Semivan, kind of explaining things. Are we live now? Are we on?
Yeah, let's hold that for
okay.
To make sure people hear it, because you did have a conversation with Jim today. Okay,
and Steve, you should re-ask all that when we are
sure.
officially up and live. Ask all that, and I can jump in.
No problem.
And Danny was going to say some stuff too. We'll let Dan step in.
But we're going to go person by person through the first question, and then the second question, third question, and then we open it up and people can talk back and forth. So,
okay, but Steve, when you bring that stuff up again, I've definitely got some stuff to say in response.
Yeah.
Very
okay.
Good.
Well, that's the open part after we've done the questions. So.
Okay. Very good.
Let me
go there. Remember what you said, Steve, and repeat it all.
Okay.
I'll say it even shorter next time.
Let's start an introduction here. This is Grant Cameron, and I have a panel with me tonight. I'm honored to have them. In 1975, I saw a UFO. I wrote a manuscript, and nobody could care less about it. I had sightings and stuff. And from that point on, all I was interested in is what was the object I saw. Somebody's got to know what I saw. And today I have a number of people that I've dealt with for a number of years. And these are people that have been down the rabbit hole with me and have given me parts of the answer to the question I first posed in 1975. So I want to thank Desta for doing the producing of this. She's in the background. And as I explained before, we're going to do three questions. We're going to go alphabetically through the order of the panel here. And I'm going to ask the questions. We have a 3-minute time limit. It's going to be like a democratic debate. And we're going to have a little bell go off. And then once we've asked the three questions, everybody's had a chance to speak on the three questions. Then we're going to open it up. And as I said, we're going to let the cats out. And all hell's going to break loose. People are going to start talking. And I want to also thank Nicole, who helped me put this together. We actually planned this a little more than a month ago. I was talking to an Australian reporter who's been working on this story very hard. He interviewed me. He's the first one to let me know that there was a New York Times article that may be dropping. And so I asked him to be on today. He said that he's not ready to go public yet. But there are a number of agencies, and I also heard today that a number of different agencies are now questioning the Pentagon, trying to get them to confirm what the New York Times is saying. So there's a bunch of news that may be breaking. Senator Reid has put out a Twitter that some people can talk about as we go along here. And Fox News is going to have some news tonight about what's going on. But thank you to Nicole. She actually got the story. I would have missed the story. She got it a couple of minutes after it broke yesterday, and has helped bring in some of the witnesses. So I'm going to do this alphabetically. I'm not going to do an introduction. We'll just go through the list, and you'll see them as I ask the question. And we're going to go, because in Canada, all men are created equal, sort of. We're going to go alphabetically. And the first person I've got, and I'm going to do my first question, and it's Steve Bassett, who has supported me all through my career. He is the guy who basically gave up on ordinary life to chase this issue, and I'm sure he's somewhat happy with how things are turning out after many years of dry time. So welcome, Steve Bassett, and are you ready for your first question?
Very ordinary. Yes, I'm ready. Fire away.
Yeah, and you ran for political office on this issue. So this is kind of good that you're leading off. So the question, of course, is the obvious question. What do you think about the New York Times? Were you happy, sad? Is it made your day? Or what do you think about this article that's come out?
But look, when the New York Times ran the October or December 16th article, 2017, those double articles delivered to them by the To the Stars Academy, the disclosure process crossed the Rubicon that day. And there's no going back. The issue, I think, at that point was formally legitimized, finally. Clearly, the editors of the New York Times checked it out and realized, okay, we've been dodging this thing for a long time, the odd article here, the odd article there, but it's time to get on board. And so they did. Now, we're in the middle of a political hurricane, and so things damped down after that. But the New York Times knows this is the biggest story in all of history. And so they tried to keep in touch. They've done a couple of things, and this is their latest story. They were able to use the Rubio maneuver in the Defense Intelligence Appropriation Bill as a hook to give Ralph and Leslie a chance to write up something that they would publish. And they were able to get the one of the gun camera footages again on the website. This has already been seen by God knows how many hundreds of millions of people. So this is their way of keeping in touch and showing that they haven't forgotten what they stepped into almost 3 years ago. So that's good. But there is a slow walk quality to all of this. I assure you, if the original two articles back in 2017 had been posted under the Obama administration or the Bush administration, it would have exploded. It would have been a major worldwide story that would have led to hearings and probably disclosure. But we're in different times. And so even something that big could not compete with the other things that are going on. So far so good, but there's kind of a balance here. They need to keep moving forward, but I'm pretty sure that most of the principals involved do not want this to go boom until after the inauguration next year.
Okay. Joe Buchman is a friend of mine, ran on the Libertarian ticket, has also run for political office under this issue. We've known each other for a number of years. He's very passionate about this issue. He was actually the moderator for Steve Bassett's citizens hearing, where 6 senators and congressmen were at a mock hearing for the issue. And so welcome, Joe, and thank you for showing up for me. And what do you think when you saw the New York Times article? Did you know it was coming?
Oh, yeah. I mean, rumors were that this has been coming for 2 years, and I get questions about it almost every week from mostly friends in the Libertarian Party saying, hey, when's this going to happen again? And there's a group of libertarians quite interested in the issue as well. 4 years ago, we ran a former governor of New Mexico, and 4 years before that, he ran for the first time, Governor Gary Johnson. So there's a little bit of a connection to that issue. It wasn't one that any of our candidates for national office have taken on full bore, except for me. And then Steve, of course, was the first candidate running for Congress to really make this an issue. But I would go back, by the way, there's 1 former senator and 5 former members of the United States House in the citizens hearing on disclosure, which ran in late May and April of 2013. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, which is mostly what Steve does for me in my life as a dear friend, and you want friends around who correct you when you're wrong, but I believe it was in the middle of that week of hearings, those 5 days in the main ballroom at the National Press Club, that a early tipping point, not crossing the Rubicon, but a shift in the compass point perhaps happened, and that the New York Times initially ran a kind of ridiculing article about the citizens hearing and then came back and ran a follow-up, which I believe that second article during that week was the first time the New York Times had ran an article that took on the issue of extraterrestrial
I
life
forgot about that.
engaging with planet Earth.
They ran
Seriously.
that article, and one of the members of the panel, I think it was, the elderly fellow. He was the oldest one, not Gravel, but the other fellow.
Roscoe Bartlett.
Yes, he went public and said, "What are you talking about? This is serious business down here." He got really irritated.
Yeah.
And so the Times sent their guy back, and they redid it. But again, that shows you where they were in 2013. Obviously, they've stepped up quite a bit since then.
Yeah, so this article's been rumored for quite a while, and some thought it was going to reveal, the entire world of what's happening with where the flying saucers are, who's been reverse engineering them, and the whole thing. But I think it's important to not only look at the article, but now to go in and on the New York Times website and start read the follow-up comments. So far, I think they've all been by Blumenthal and not by Keene, of what they're saying to people who are commenting. So the article has a life. It didn't just get published once. It's going on every hour, every minute of every day. And some of those comments are quite fascinating, as are the responses. So I think history will look back on this, as a tipping point that perhaps began in 2013, a slight shift. And now, while we saw the slope of the mountain in 2013, there's rocks starting to fall and roll downhill. This isn't going to stop. Other media are going to pick up on it. They're not going to want the New York Times to break that next story that takes it to another level, that reveals where the technology is, where the saucers are, who's been involved in reverse engineering, and why it's been covered up. There's a lot of people in the media starting to ask those questions because of what the New York Times has done 2013, 2017, and then again yesterday. It's an exciting time to be alive.
Beautiful. Next up is my good friend Melinda Leslie, who is in a long time conversation with Jim Semivan, who's part of this. So I'm getting some insights from her, and I think she just had a conversation. But Melinda, what did you know this article is coming, and what's your take on this article? Is Melinda muted?
How's that? Better?
There, now you're back.
Sorry about that. Oh yeah, mute. So yes, I certainly knew. I've been following in the UFO online community, Facebook, Twitter, where there's been quite a storm over all this. And yeah, I certainly knew, and knew something was planned on happening. I think, like many people, when I first read it, there was a little bit of disappointment, thinking they had softballed it, but I even posted something saying, well, they softballed it, but at least the ball keeps rolling, we're still in the game. But the more I thought about it over time, and I saw other people posting this quite a bit all over the place, and in the comments and talking about it, which is that when you sat with it for a while, you realize, wait a second, this had a bigger impact. Someone quite eloquently pointed out, this isn't for us, the UFO community, this is for the public. And for the public, that's a big statement to get into regardless of Reed dialing it back now, but certainly Eric's comments and others about there being a crash retrieval program. So that's no matter how you look at it, that's huge. That's a huge statement going out to the general public. And it's actually a big step forward. Is it less of a step than maybe we wanted? Yeah, but it's still a big step. People are talking about it. It's mainstream. It's hit everywhere now, as far as I can tell, major news sources, right and left. And there was this interesting thing. I was talking to Semivan right before him, but I was telling him, meaning Jim Semivan, for those that don't know, but I was telling him how I was tickled a little bit that, what is it, Mediate magazine, I forget the name, but they had posted this thing about the reaction to the article, like the cultural reaction to the article. But down in the comments, Nick Pope commented down in the comments and said, wow, that, the impact this had, that now you have articles about its impact. So not only do you have the original article, but now you have major news sources doing articles on the impact. So it's got legs. It's got legs, and we need to say, okay, this is something. I was talking to someone who worked in a local store in town yesterday and just went, who wasn't that familiar with it, but he says, oh, he talks about UFOs to his family and friends all the time, and people that come into the store and they all treat him like he's crazy. I said, read this article, cite it, cite what the Senate is doing. This is at the point that this is where you go to your skeptical family and friends and say, look what's going on. Look how serious this is being taken. And that is no small feat. So I think, again, after I've had a time to sit with the article, I realize it's a much bigger deal than I originally thought.
Just a little side note on this. Did Semivan indicate that they had something to do with this coming out?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were interviewed for it. They knew it was going on. I mean, Lou is in it, extensively, and yeah. So he said, yeah, we knew about it. We were interviewed, and we think it's a bold step, and we support it completely. And he had nothing but supportive things to say, and that they were very happy with it. That was his words to me.
Beautiful. Next up is Bob McGwier, who spent 30 years in intelligence and the scientific community. Welcome, Bob. Thank you for showing up for me. Are you muted?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Froze up.
Thank you, Grant, for having me on. So
Yeah.
I have several comments.
Good.
First, Eric Davis went much further than he's ever gone before. He literally went to the crash debris, etc., and that was much further than he's ever been willing to go before, which before was, I have no comment. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is the New York Times messed up in their quote of Harry Reid. That was very disappointing, and Harry backed off way from that today. The third thing is Blumenthal got on the New York Times website today and interacted with lots of readers, and the comments he made were astounding. This is not the last of these articles. There were many things people questioned him about, and he said 2 out of 3 of those will be covered in the next article. And they were crash debris, Wilson documents, etc. So Blumenthal went on the public record today in the comments on the New York Times website as saying that much more is coming, and he's certain it will be soon. He can't tell you when, but it's soon, because he's got to get it past all that editorial control. The last thing is it's just very, very interesting that they keep coming back to the well. I want to comment now, not on the article, but on the Senate. I've had dealings with the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence for a while. Mark Warner, who is the ranking member, was my senator, and Mark Warner was instrumental in the Hume Center at Virginia Tech, where I was chief scientist for many years. He was instrumental in us getting access to our first major classified contract for the intelligence community, which literally made the Hume Center. Okay, so without Mark Warner's approval, it would not have been easy for Rubio. So this tells you very clearly this was an absolutely, both parties were on board with this going forward, and the National Defense Authorization Act passed the Senate, S4049 passed today. It had the language in it. So if the House doesn't wreck it and Trump signs it, it's the law of the land.
Beautiful. You mentioned the Senator Reid backing off, so let me read what he actually wrote a couple of hours ago, and people can discuss this in the open part. Senator Reid wrote, I have no knowledge and have never suggested the federal government or any other entity has unidentified flying objects or debris from other worlds. I have consistently said we must stick to science and not fairy tales about little green men. And that brings up my friend Dave Scott. We've got another Canadian on here. Dave Scott runs Spaced Out Radio. He's interviewed a whole series of people on this issue for a number of years. And he's also running a disclosure initiative to a number of Canadian people in Parliament. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Grant. How are you?
Beautiful. Thank you for being on. I appreciate it. And let me get your input. I know you posted on Facebook today looking for people's input on to what they thought about the New York Times article. Were you surprised? What did you think about it? And go from there.
Well, the first thing that kind of surprised me about this entire article was the fact about the crash retrieval. Do we have it or do we not? We see Harry Reid coming out today and basically saying that he never said that, as you had just stated. And, you know, the way I look at it, I'm not a researcher. I'm a radio host, and I am a journalist and an experiencer. Okay. He has no choice to say that. Pardon me. And the reason why he doesn't have a choice but to say that is because maybe he said something that he shouldn't have. Okay, so to watch UFO Twitter and a lot of people out there today kind of jump down the throats of Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Keene, and the rest on this topic, I think is a little ill-advised, because we do not know what was actually said in those interviews. We don't know if they were recorded. Likely they were. And Harry Reid has no choice but to say what he had to say. He doesn't want to look like a fool in all of this. He's got to try and keep his upkeep in Washington and his power there. So that's kind of what we've been following in regards to this entire story today. I think there's a lot more being said. I think that this went one of two ways. Either Harry said that he said something that he shouldn't have, or
Oh, you lost your sound.
Oh, lost your sound, Dave. It says that you're on mute.
there we go.
Okay.
Am I
Yeah.
there now? Okay. So Harry actually, it comes down to 2 points. Either one, Harry Reid made the quote and he said something that he shouldn't have, or number two, what happened was the editor of the Times article actually cut that quote and misquoted it. I don't think it would have came from Keene. I don't believe it would have came from Blumenthal that happened. It's just one of those things that I find very interesting in this article. And the fact that the people in the UFO field, whether they're researchers, reporters, whatever, are eating that up, saying this totally throws the article in the garbage, I think is not true. And I'm sure I'll take a little bit of heat over that. But there's a process on how the media works. And what we saw in this article was how the media worked, and it didn't make this article look very flattering one day later.
And just to spell it for people, you've actually worked as an actual reporter, correct?
Yes, I am actually one of the only journalists who is an experiencer as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Dave. Next, we have Danny Silva, who runs Silva Report. He's new to the game. He's not, been around forever like the rest of us. But Danny has been around and he's broken a number of stories. He has a blog site and he may have some new stuff for us. He and a number of other people are sort of on the leading edge of this thing. They understand technology and picking off stuff. And so welcome, Danny. And I appreciate your being on, and give to me what your opinion of what you saw. You must have known way before the rest of us that this was coming.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, a lot of us knew it was coming just because they were interviewing so many people, and namely Michael Hall was the first one. So it's just hard to keep all those people quiet no matter how much they wanted to. So we definitely knew it was coming. I think they're basically continuously working. Some of the Times people, they're always digging into stuff, sniffing around too. So you never know when something's going to come out. But then it really ramped up, I think, a few months ago. I think it's a really important story. Like Melinda said, I've been saying this too. It's for the public. It's not for us. I know we wanted a lot more in there, but the fact of the matter is it's for the public. It's in the New York Times because of it. Otherwise, a lot of what you read in there, we already knew, thanks to Lou Elizondo and Eric Davis and people speaking out over the years that I've been reporting on and other people are reporting on. So if you're reading a Silva record, you would have known about a lot of this. But, that doesn't mean the public knows about it. They're not the public, the New York Times crowd, they're not reading my blog generally. So it's a huge article and it's moving things forward. Of course, there's crash retrievals. I think you can look at everyone across the board agrees with it. Most people do, most important sources. They're all saying that there's crash retrievals. The only question is there a whole craft? I'm not so sure that there is. I think maybe there isn't. But that's a lot more debated, and many people don't agree on that. But even I always look at everyone across the board, and even if people that don't like each other, they're all agreeing on the same thing, and they're all agreeing that there's been crash retrievals for decades. So I think we could probably take that to the bank at this point.
Just as a side note, you're on the sort of leading edge. I mean, we heard about the New York Post coming with an article, the Australian guy you probably know about. Is there a lot of other stuff that you know of that may be coming down the pike here, a second New York Times article? And what do you know? Because you're on the leading edge of this.
I haven't heard about the Post. You know, everything that all the people I've talked to, all the mainstream reporters, they're looking at the Times article and they're trying to pick it up and basically report on what the Times reported on. So I don't know anyone else that's digging into it on their own. I'm kind of listening to you talk about the Post and things like that. Everyone else just wants to pick up the New York Times, that's a mainstream reporter or television personality, and talk about it. And they're trying to get past their editors and they're trying to get past their producers in order to kind of just have the New York Times article go more viral. But I don't know of any other big news agencies that are working on their own stories. I'm just going to be listening to you and other people talk about that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Last but not least, another Canadian, Victor Viggiani from Zealand Communications. Victor is sort of the Steve Bassett of Canada. He's been running around for a number of years trying to do a bunch of initiatives on this subject. Welcome, Victor.
Hello, how are you?
Appreciate your being on. Did you finally find the article? We were trying to link you up with the article. Have you now read it?
Yeah, actually, I brought it up and read it on the Baltimore Sun covered it.
Okay.
It put the whole thing right out. Yeah.
And what do you think in terms of the article, and does it have any implication? Because you're a communications guy. Is there anybody in Canada that's sort of phoned you up and wanted to know about the article?
Not really, and I guess that's one of the points that I want to make is that all of this stuff is kind of coming out. And reading this particular article, and there was another one on the Washington Examiner the other day, and a couple of others that covered it in a kind of a circuitous way. And I do find it interesting that certain levels of media, and I know Steve will back me up on this one, that the certain regional levels of media cover this stuff, but there is no major cover it. Now, I realize that the New York Times did what they did, and I completely, I'm in agreement with, and I applaud their efforts. But one of the things that I think needs to be done here is the move by Marco Rubio was a game changer. And I think Steve made that point on the Joe Montaldo show a couple of days ago. This is a game changer. And the problem is nobody is talking about it. And when I say nobody is talking about it, is no one in the mainstream media has picked up the fact that a previous presidential candidate or someone who is ostensibly good enough to run for president is making these kinds of statements about this particular issue. And this, I think, is next to criminal. So if Marco Rubio can do these kinds of things, say these things, along with Mark Warner, in addition to the other Congress people and senators that were briefed before, well in advance of all of this, why these people are not coming forward and the mainstream media is not picking up in the way that it should. And I congratulate Ralph and Leslie for doing what they did. But for some reason, journalism is sending us a message. These quiet journalists are sending us a message, and we're just not picking up on it. The blame is on us, and it's also on journalists that really have the information but don't want to make a big splash. I know Melinda made this point a little bit earlier, and I think was it Danny? You also alluded to it. This is a public issue. It's not the UFO community issue. It's not the Congress's issue. It's not the White House's. This is a public family of the globe issue. And we need to find a way to get people in mainstream media to have this the #1 story every single day. Now, I realize there's a lot of contingent information out there with the pandemic and all this other stuff that's going on. And, that is a blinder. It's sort of like a big truck hitting the issue and bashing it all to pieces. But we need to find a way to get people. Are you all familiar with Brian Bender with Politico?
Yep.
Okay. We need to have someone like Brian on MSNBC in the morning, first thing in the A block on MSNBC with Joe Scarborough. We need to have him on, and we need to have Leslie on there, and we need to have Ralph on there. Now, how do we do that kind of thing? And the stuff that we're doing right now is good. I mean, I appreciate all the efforts that everybody does, but basically what we're doing is we're in Canada, we have a term called ragging the puck. I knew I'd get a,
Dave will know that one too. Yeah.
I knew I got a rise out of Grant and Dave on that one. Ragging the puck is a thing that it's done in hockey. That's our national game. And pardon me if I sound trite here, but I think it's instructive. What you do in hockey when you don't know what to do in attacking the other zone is you bring the puck back into your own zone, you pass it back and forth, and you kind of just delay the game until you get things set, so that you really don't go on the attack. You're just sort of playing with the puck in your own zone, and that's called ragging the puck. And that's what the UFO community is doing right now. We are ragging the puck. We are not going forward in attacking journalism. And I'm saying attacking may be the wrong word, but challenging journalism to pick this up as a public story. It is the public who needs to be informed about this. And we've all alluded to that in our last few conversations. But I think that's something that we are sadly lacking, and we have to make a move with this somehow. And if we don't make a move on it, Marco Rubio's move today and yesterday in the previous legislation that was passed. Now, did someone say that this stuff was passed? Just Bob, did you say it was passed today?
So the bill passed the Senate.
Okay.
The National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the Department of Defense, contained the Rubio language in the intelligence part, and it passed the Senate. That's half the legislative battle. The House has to pass it, and then the president has to sign it, and then it's law. But you're correct that it's a massive game changer because it mandates public reports from this UFO committee.
And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make, Bob, is that this kind of reporting, we've stalled it before. We've kind of let it sort of go. And now it's our opportunity to get journalists involved in this particular legislation. Why does that particular piece of legislation have stuff on UFOs or whatever it happens to be in the legislation? Why? That's the first time, as far as I'm concerned, and I followed American history pretty closely. It's the first time anything of a major inset of legislation has been talking about UFO crash retrieval parts, technology, et cetera, et cetera. It's the first time. This is an absolute game changer. And if we don't take advantage of this with good, solid journalists, we're missing the buck and we're just ragging the puck. I'll stop right there.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Quick comment, if I can, Grant, on that, just for clarification on what Bob had just answered to. Semivan was telling me, maybe others know how the process works, but Semivan was telling me that it goes in August to Congress. And so then Congress has to approve it before it goes to the, president for signing, obviously. So that'll be in August. And Jim told me they should hear from, friends, inside channels about what's going on with that. And they'll probably be the first within our community anyways to put it out with probably Chris Mellon's tweets or something like he always does. As soon as they hear, if that's gone through or if there's any problems. Jim, just so you guys know, he was also saying that they're not really expecting much in it to get changed. It was worded very carefully. He said, unless they line through some whole thing, but he said, we don't think they'll do that. And he said, if anything, we think Congress will come out with their wish list and add to those 8 items and actually add to them. So he said, we really think they're going to add to it, is what he's saying. And from their connections in the Senate.
But isn't there a 180-day caveat on action on this that brings it into the next presidency?
Oh yeah, no, once it gets enacted, so it's not for the budget till next year. So it doesn't become enacted, my understanding, Bob, you sounds like you're nodding and until next year's budget.
October of next year. October starts the new fiscal year. October starts the new fiscal year unless
October this year. October
this year starts the next fiscal year.
Yes.
It's October this year.
Okay, so October this year, I guess. That's no wonder the process is in August. That makes sense. The process is in August, and then once it gets enacted, then they have 180 days for the the new task force with the Office of Naval Intelligence to present their report to the Senate.
Good.
So does that mean that that the language that Rubio inserted into that legislation, how long will it take that language to get into the public domain?
Well, when you say the language from Rubio, yes, it happened in the Senate committee meetings, but I'll tell you what Semivan said. Pretty much, Chris Mellon wrote that whole thing. That's Chris Mellon really wrote it.
Well,
And yes, it had input
sure.
from the senators, but
Yeah, but that doesn't answer my question.
okay, go back to what was your question? I'm sorry.
It was how long will it take that language, irrespective of who wrote it, how long will it take that language to get into the public domain through good journalism?
S4049 is a public document. You can read it now.
Yeah, it's there now. Yes, absolutely. It's on my Facebook page and probably many of ours if people want to go look. I'm sure Steve has it on his website.
Okay, good. We can get more into this when we get to the open section. I'm going to bring on Nicole Sakich, who helped me, because she's the one that found the article and alerted me minutes after it went public. So Nicole, come on and tell us what you thought when you saw this article. We've been talking about it for quite a few weeks.
Well, the first thing I thought was, holy cows, I got to call Grant.
Because we said we were going to do this thing, and then I was sleeping, and suddenly you phoned me and you said, it's on, get it up.
I know, I never phoned you. That's why it was odd. But no, and I think like Danny had said, and some of the other guys I've talked to over the last couple of days, you know, we've been getting up every morning, checking the papers, checking online, and waiting for this to come out because we have heard it's coming for so long. And so it was kind of, you know, speculation for a while as to why it wasn't coming out when we all had been told, you know, by solid sources that it was. So I will say I tend to agree. I think this is maybe a baby step for us inside the community, but it's a huge step outside of ufology. I mean, I've had people in my town, you know, and those at work, you know, they were like, it's in the paper. And like what they are sending me is, you know, amazement. They're not freaked out. They're not, you know, running off to church. They're not even saying you were right, you know, to me, but they are saying, this is big. We've never seen this before. They're actually talking about this, and it's coinciding with Rubio and the president, and, you know, a lot of things are falling into place. I will say, I do agree with kind of the Twitterverse on this. What we have gotten is kind of a sanitized version of maybe what we were hoping for, but it's still important, and it's still moving the dial forward in the community and in the conversation. So
beautiful. I have another acknowledgement to make. Giuliano Marinkovic, who I call UFO Google, I talked to him about coming on the thing, and he's very private. He doesn't want to come on. He said, I'll stay in the background. He's the one that gave me the read response this afternoon. He's got a new one out here. Giuliano Marinkovic just retweeted Leslie Kane that the New York Times story is trending #1 on the website right now. So he's going to update me if anything breaks during this broadcast. Giuliano will let us know, and we'll put it out here immediately. So let's go to question number 2, and we can maybe start with Steve, and it's basically almost the same as the first question, but I'm sure Steve's got more to add. We're almost like little kids who have, you know, we're in a situation where we're sitting in the back seat of the car, we're on this long trip, and it's taken us our whole life. And it's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And it seems like we almost may be there. So the question is, where do we go from here? Assuming that we've made some headway, where do we go from here, Steve?
Who's the we you're referring to?
Well, all the people the UFO people who have said all along, you know, we want disclosure, we want something, and now it appears that we've got it. What would you suggest the next step is beyond this article? What should the community be doing, the research community, or what should the government be doing?
That's a tough question. The snarky answer is to relax, continue to do what work you're doing, but don't be in a hurry. We have a very unusual situation right now, beyond anything I have seen in my lifetime before. There are only two stories, Trump and COVID-19. That's all. The To the Stars Academy was not supposed to be launched in 2017. It was supposed to be launched after Clinton's election during the transition period. When she lost, it put the To the Stars guys who had pretty much already committed to the program, and they weren't doing it as a hobby. It wasn't like a 4-year plan. They planned to launch that thing, and we're going to take this right to hearings under Clinton, who fully intended to disclose. When Trump won, that was a black swan event of biblical proportions, and they were completely thrown off their game. They didn't know what to do. Ultimately, they made a decision in 11 months to go ahead and launch anyway and see what happened. The New York Times ran the stories. Those are the #1 trending stories at the time. They're beyond anything that's been done since. And since that launch on October 11th, 2017, as you know, I have a print media archive. There's about 520 stories in mainstream media relating to the To the Stars Academy and those events and subsequent actions. 525, including New York Times, Washington Post, plenty of coverage, but it wasn't going to catch fire. They're following it, but the To the Stars Academy knows that hearings should come first before we get a presidential announcement. And they had two problems. One, they could not imagine hearings during the Trump administration because the situation was absolutely chaotic and totally toxic. It would have been the worst possible time to try to hold something like this. And secondly, they did not want Trump to engage this issue. Same thing with the Pentagon. They were out, but they didn't want that. And I could go in at length about that, but let's just say that while Trump has been asked a couple of questions and he's given small responses, the implications of Trump engaging this issue full bore would be catastrophic. And so what they did was they slow walked it. And the most important thing they did is start holding meetings on the Hill. The article incorrectly states there's been classified hearings on the Hill on the ET issue. That is not true. What has been happening for 2 years is Mellon and a few others, particularly witnesses, have been giving private briefings on the Hill, not to be discussed, not to be given to the press. Warner is one of the few that mentioned he had been briefed, which means that Rubio was probably briefed shortly thereafter. And so what are they doing by having these meetings on the Hill with, and DeLong alluded there'd been many, privately with committee chairs and so forth. Why, just to keep them informed? No. They are setting the table for hearings, but not under Trump, under the next president. Now, that is why things are going slow. That is why diving in now. Now, I'm starting my podcast in a couple of days. I've got plans. I'm going to do the best I can to get involved. I'd even like to get on CNN or something. That would be nice. Haven't been there in, I don't know, Coon's age. But in terms of like, no. Hearings next year. Now, one of two things are going to happen. Either Biden's going to win or Trump's going to win. If Biden wins, it's full bore. Johnny, what do they call it? Katie bar the door. Because if they're going to have hearings, they need to have them very quickly. You want to have those hearings very early in the administration, maybe February, before other issues can come up, before the partisanship gets going. You want to start that administration off with the most heavily watched hearings in the history of the Congress. And boom, off we go. Disclosure next year, probably by the spring. If Trump wins, well, they got a tough call. It's probably a 4-year situation, though I assume there'll be another impeachment. And they have to decide, do we want to walk this for 4 more years? I don't think so. So they may go ahead and have those hearings, particularly if the Democrats take the Senate. Because if the Democrats take the Senate and the House, then essentially a whole committee situation is controlled by Congress. Trump has no say. And so they can hold these hearings as they wish. Donald can say what he wants, and the issue could move forward. And of course, they'll be the most watched hearings in history. I can assure you that the To the Stars Academy has got scores of witnesses already lined up. Elizondo alluded to the fact they've gotten hundreds and hundreds of contacts, mostly military, saying, I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story. You're going to be hearing more of these over the next 4 episodes of Unidentified. So they have all the witnesses to hold hearings for weeks, months. That's what's coming. And the only question is, who will be president when it starts? But when it starts should be no later than early February. And the New York Times, which is walking this forward slowly as well, I assure you will get very intense very fast. They've established their position. They're relatively ahead of the game. The Washington Post done some stuff. But I assure you, the publisher of the New York Times is fully aware there's an extraterrestrial presence. Be assured of that. Been notified, how would you say, told off the record, if just didn't conclude on their own ability to examine the evidence. They fully know that. The question is, when do they dive in completely? What are the implications? What's the political situation? And so they're playing a careful game. The To the Stars guys are playing a careful game. This is not at random. This is very elaborately orchestrated, except that the plan got thrown up in the air when lightning struck, November 3, 2016. But they decided to go forward, bless their hearts. And the other thing was, and I'll finish with this, is that they knew that if they couldn't just move forward and go bam, 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 that they were going to be sitting ducks for years. The target of every skeptic, every debunker, every dissatisfied person out there that doesn't believe a damn thing the government says. And that's exactly what happened. They were all attacked. Luis Elizondo was attacked. All kinds of conspiracy theories are out there. They didn't expect to have to go through that, but they've had to weather that storm, and to their credit, they have. So good wishes to them. Watch my podcast, and I'll wait at the phone for a call from MSNBC. Nick Pope has been on Tucker Carlson like 49 times or something. I mean, come on, guys.
You get your turn.
No, somebody new. My phone number has been out there for 23 years. I've never changed it. Give me a friggin' call.
Okay. Joe, just step in here and help out Steve. Can you help him out?
You know how often I've heard step in here and help out Steve?
He has many times, by the way.
I love helping out Steve. You know, the citizens hearing was maybe the first major role I played in that, and getting Senator Gravel, who read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record and was a whistleblower. And that's who we need again, is somebody like a Senator Gravel. And Steve mentioned what I was going to mention was June 19th, 2019, a year and a month ago, Senator Warner comes out and says, there's classified briefings happening in the United States Senate on ETs and UFOs.
He was referring to Mellon. Yeah.
And he didn't say who the other senators were, who all was there. But you got to believe if there's a couple of senators, Rubio and Warner, talking about ETs, and there are classified hearings happening, some room associated with the United States Senate that's probably a secure space, every senator is going to want to get in on that. Every member of the United States House going to want to get in on that. So you don't just have reporters digging into this issue. I'm sure you've got a lot of congressional staff that have been directed by senators and members of the United States House. Don't let me get behind on this issue. I don't want to be looking like a fool here. Oh, is this happening in my district? I have some firsthand experience with that. I ran in the special election in 2017 in Utah, and for the second time running for the United States House, called for the United States Congress to pass whistleblower protection, eliminate any contracts that violate the United States Constitution, anything that has to do with waste, fraud, criminal activity, or, by the way, the ET issue. And I did that in a series of debates. I got in 8 of them with a former mayor of Provo, Utah, who's now United States Congressman John Curtis. 2 years ago, my wife Cindy and I had lunch with Congressman Curtis in the members-only dining room in the United States Capitol. It was very kind. He was very complimentary, by the way. He publicly stated in more than one of those debates that I had won the first debate we were in, and several of the others, and then he had to get better because, you know, when you got nothing to lose as a candidate running for office, you can win a debate. You're not going to win votes by winning those debates, maybe. You can have some fun, and it's a great way to bring attention to an issue. And so I said to the congressman, listen, there's 2 things I want to talk to you about. Well, first of all, I said to the congressman, you know, I'm really impressed with how you hit the ground running. He was prepared to be a United States member of Congress. I said, if I'd won that election, it would have been a train wreck. I didn't have a staff. I didn't have a legislative agenda. He had all that. I said, is there anything that surprised you when you became a congressman? And he said, yeah, I'm surprised by the degree to which our leadership wants to take all of our freedoms away. That was 2 years ago. And I said, well, you know, when you've had enough of it, I can give you a footnote in history. You could become the first sitting libertarian member of the United States Congress, but you better hurry because Justin Amash may do it first. And of course, we now have a bunch of Democrats, a bunch of Republicans, and one big L libertarian United States member of the House in Congressman Amash. And the second thing I said to him was, if you ever get briefed about UFOs, let me know. Or if you want background on UFOs. And he just laughed and said, you know, no junior member in the United States House is going to get briefed on that. But I think I've proved somewhat prophetic from 2017 to today with at least one member of the United States House on those two issues. And they are a little bit intertwined, I think. You know, libertarians call for extreme levels of government transparency, if you want, among other things. The New York Times, you know, it's a drip, drip, drip. There were the two articles in 2013 related to the citizen hearing. There was another one we didn't mention, May of 2016, where Hillary Clinton and John Podesta were quoted about their interest in this subject. And there was a bunch of media around that. And now there's the 2017 article and now the one just recently. So what that creates is not just one article that got published. It creates a ripple effect, both in Blumenthal now actively engaging readers of the New York Times in an ongoing way. In those comments, there's almost 500 of them now, and it is trending #1. But then other media who don't want to get left behind. So it's not only members of Congress that don't want to get left behind, but every other media outlet, you know, would love to break this story before the New York Times does. At least that seems to be the direction we're heading. That's quite exciting. And so I think we need to look at it as, you know, not just an article, but the full effect of that being a lot of people getting really interested in this. And the New York Times may want to keep the lead on it. And I would expect they would, especially because you got to know, not only does the publisher of the New York Times, I think Steve's correct, probably has been given information that can't be reported because, you know, can't be cited, verified, whatever, it's out there a little bit. I'll tell you the other information they have. Revenues are tanking. The economy is a freaking mess. We want to try to keep our business together and not lay people off. And oh, by the way, there's #1 in terms of hits on our website is related to this article by Leslie Keene. Maybe we should have her do another one so we can stay in business. I think there's that pressure happening too.
Good. Leslie, you want to jump in on this? Where do we go, Leslie, with this? Melinda, hello.
And I have to learn to unmute, so sorry. Okay. Tell me again the question, because I admit I'm tired. And forgot what the original question was.
Now we got the New York Times, another big article. Where should we be going with this?
Oh, goodness. I think everyone else started their comment with this is a loaded question. It is. Was it Steve, I think, who just said, take it slow? And he said the snarky comment, but I don't think it was snarky at all. I thought it was very logical. I think we need to take it slow. For what it's worth, Jim Sammy Van Keet's telling me this is going to take a long time. They're going to stick with it once the report gets added to the budget, it gets approved in August, regardless of what changes or additions to it. He said To the Stars is going to stay on it. I said, you've met with the senators for years in closed door sessions. You done? He said, no, we're just starting. It's like, we're going to be, the quote was on the gray hairs, keep up the pressure on the gray hairs. So, in ufology, we want to feel like we're maybe doing something to help. And in this case, it's like, I think we're kind of stuck because we're not meeting with the senators, they are, but he said, we're going to stick with it. Depending on what comes back in the 180-day report, they're going to say, nope, not enough, got to go deeper. And another thing that he said is that everyone here's talked about the Navy and the Office of Naval Intelligence involvement with the task force. He said the Navy, and he said this in multiple conversations with me, the Navy is fully on board. The Navy is pushing this. Those closed door Senate meetings happen with folks from the ONI and, so from the Navy and To the Stars working together. He said, we're like partnered up on this. And so they're pushing this. And we didn't go into all the list of reasons as to why the Navy's pushing it, but Nicole recently stated it in another thing that I did, Grant, for you, that other interview with you and Nicole, and she summed that up with what are all the reasons the Navy could be interested in. And sure, I mean, they're obvious. So the Navy is interested for a lot of obvious reasons, I think, and they're greatly pushing this. With To the Stars Academy, and I was going to say all we can do is sit back and watch, with the exception of one thing, which is write your senators and congressmen, which is a given. So you can write, and I know To the Stars Jim has stated to me that would be the one thing people can really do to help. But as far as the rest of the community, I mean, I think we can just watch the bouncing ball, like I keep equating it to the softball game, but the ball's in play, keep watching, keep watching, pay attention. And I think that those folks, meaning To the Stars, as soon as they hear anything, they'll let us know. At least Chris will be posting it on Twitter. So those of us following Chris on Twitter will get it the day that it happens, and I think that's where we're at. I think patience on our end, because they tell me, even though things are moving quickly, this is going to take a long time, is what I keep being told by Jim anyways.
Okay, before I go to Bob, for the 5 people who don't know who Jim Semivan is, explain who this guy is that you're talking to.
Oh gosh. Vice President of Operations for To the Stars Academy, co-founder of it along with Tom DeLong. There's more involved there, by the way, but anyways, I'll say that for now. And huge background, very high level CIA. At one time was in charge of Black projects and the direction of money to those projects while in that position, the CIA, and did retire last year. Did not have that as his final position, had a consulting position and has retired from that. So that's where it stands, but co-founder of To the Stars, and it's director of operations for To the Stars Academy.
And I'm glad you got him on speed dial. Good.
Bob, I'm glad he takes my call.
Bob McGwier, you've been in this business, intelligence, you know how this system works. What would you be suggesting now? Is there any way the UFO community can help in this, researchers?
I want to point out that it's not random people that are engaging with Blumenthal and others on the New York Times website. It's UFO people. They are asking all the intelligent questions and getting all the great answers with Blumenthal. Now, the other kind of major revelation, which happened today, that I can tell you about, is there have been all sorts of conversations between ufology people and Leslie and Blumenthal for weeks. Project Unity J released today that he and Mr. X had been sitting on a ton of the Wilson story for weeks because Leslie and Blumenthal had been engaged with them. Now, I know Mr. X, he and I are friends. We're working on several science projects and other things together, and he is a really intelligent, brilliant researcher. Mr. X did a major investigation of the Wilson documents. Why would Leslie and Ralph asked them to sit on the Wilson documents unless it was pertinent to what the New York Times is about to do. That was what they asked them for, and that is what they did. So they've sat on the Wilson document stuff that Mr. X has been studying this particular subject for years. And Dolan has done a 5-hour interview with a different fellow on the Wilson documents that's done research. And it's just a big deal. And they have sat on it for a while. Okay, that's the first big revelation is I think the Wilson documents are what's coming. People were really disappointed that it wasn't just, let's tell everything to everybody and drag the alien bodies out and President Trump comes out and says they're real. I can just give you a couple of facts. Melinda Leslie's history is why that will never happen. She was abducted, abused, tortured, kidnapped by MILABs. If they did all that out in the open and just blabbed it out there, there would be lawsuits and criminal activity that would go on for decades. This wide open declaration of all this is never going to happen because of people like Melinda. Okay, the next thing is we can expect a slow drip drab of Chris Mellon and others with To the Stars Academy kind of constantly on Twitter. And Mellon, he has really been hitting it out of the park on social media. Very engaged, very interactive, talking to people. I don't mind bragging that he is following Sky-Hub and commenting constantly on Sky-Hub while we're getting this equipment ready. Steve McDaniel and the team are really working hard on various aspects of that to automatically capture UFO evidence. Okay, so Mellon is following that. He has been out in front. The thing that not many people realize, except some people in ufology, is Mellon, before he was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, he was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence staffer most closely associated with Mark Warner. They're buddies. They've known each other forever. And that's a whole lot more important than his family is the Mellon banking stuff. The guy's connected to SSCI, Mark Warner, and so forth. And I just think Mellon is a big deal. He is a major player and he's really pushing the ball along. And I'm glad he's kind of the lead man on bringing all of this together with the Senate and so forth, because he is a serious pro.
Beautiful. Thanks for that. Thanks for the scoop. Dave Scott, have you got another scoop? Where we're going to go with this? You interact a lot with you. You've got a big audience. What are you hearing? What do you think we should be doing?
Well, I think this is a real time for the media to step up and really push together. But I think something like this also shows how little the people who are working above the UFO community really mean to or how we mean to the rest of the UFO community and those above, those in that Blumenthal and Keene area, where the people they are talking to are not the Grant Camerons or the Richard Dolans or people like that, or anybody of this ilk. They are going above and beyond. It's like what they're trying to do is separate the UFO community, which we are all a part of, and make their own statement regarding this entire phenomena, which is something that the To the Stars Academy has numerous times stated that they don't have an interest in the field of ufology. Now, from a media standpoint, what has to happen here is we need other reporters, as Victor stated, to jump on board with this and start asking deeper questions. This isn't just about the idea, Grant, that we need to be able to talk about the Tic Tac video or gimbal or go fast or what the government knows. There is, if we go in recent history, 70 years of history that need answers. We still need to know what happened at Roswell. We still need to know what happened even as recently as the Phoenix Lights and all of these instances in between. So I agree with Victor, what he said a little bit ago, that more reporters have to come on. But this story is so big that no reporter is going to be able to actually jump into it without at least taking a look at the history. Yes, the new news is fine. The new news that we are seeing today is great that it is getting publicity, but not yet have we seen a single journalist out there take the plunge and ask the simple questions that we all want to know. And until that happens, the media is going to keep running in circles. Okay, that's going to create this bubble in between ufology and what is happening in the mainstream. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of news in between that is really, really being missed because of that.
Okay, beautiful. Appreciate that. Danny Silva, you're on sort of, again, I mentioned you're sort of on the leading edge of this, and you're one of the young people, you and Nicole. So maybe even you and Nicole can weigh in on this. What would you see as a young person in terms of the future of this? Because you've only been in it a while, but you've made it move quite quickly from the work that you've been doing. What would you and Nicole say about this?
It's definitely a team effort from everyone, even on social media, and people call themselves social media activists and things like that, and it actually really does change perception, and we're hooking more people and more people in. Me myself, I'm going to be continuing to report accurately, and I know mainstream reporters and even people in Washington DC read my blog because they end up contacting me and telling me. So it's like they're reading our blogs and our information, they're listening to you probably, Grant, and then they're thinking about how they can translate that into mainstream articles. So that's important. That's really important. We are on the front edge of it in many ways. So we're not just stuck in the UFO community, although sometimes we are, but we're also, every time one of these stories happens, there's more eyes on us. And then another point is the UAPTF, the UAP task force, they are, I don't want to say war, but I have been actually. They're basically at war with some of these semi-illegal or illegal programs. I think that's been the plan for a long time. Get these programs to cough up what they have, give them to UAPTF, UAPTF is the continuation of ATIP, by the way. It definitely is. It's ran out of OUSDI with most of the heavy lifting done by the Navy. They are the continuation of ATIP, and they want what all these secret programs have. The thing is, a lot of these other people are read into these programs, the secret ones. They just don't have access to get what they have. So they want access to that stuff. No more is it okay where these secret programs can keep everything squirreled away somewhere. That's not okay anymore. It's 2020, and we need to have all that stuff in the hands of the politicians, in the hands of UAPTF, and that's part of why this whole bill is coming about. So it's really important movement behind the scenes. There's politicians like Marco Rubio, Warner, all these people that have been briefed, and they're banging their fist on the desk now saying, we got to get this stuff out because we want to see it. And it's not okay for it to be locked up. So I think that's a really, really important point. I think that's what's going to keep happening. UAPTF has more power than ATIP did, the Lou Elizondo version of ATIP. Not only that, but the leader of UAPTF is higher up now than Lou Elizondo was. So everything's been working that they've been trying to do.
They have 2 stars.
Yeah, so it's great progress. And what we're seeing now with the bill, with more stories, it's more pressure on the neck of these secret programs. And I wouldn't be sleeping too well if I was working for one of those programs. They either need to cough it up, or Lou Elizondo hinted on Coast to Coast, they may end up going to jail. So we're going to see what happens with them, but they need to change how they're operating.
Beautiful. You operate a lot on Twitter. We're talking me into this. I'm sort of catching it, but you're the people you're interacting, you use a lot of Twitter, right?
I'm using all social media. I'm trying to use anything I can get my hands on. I started on social media, building up a following, and that's how we talk. At the same time, I'm trying to maybe take a step back from some of the social media stuff, but that's how we speak in 2020, and that's how information is exchanged. But so it's important to catch the young people. I'm going on any kind of not just Twitter, because a lot of young kids aren't on Twitter now. They're on all these other programs and apps. So I'm trying to use anything I can. I just want to get the message out. The whole thing is not to speak to the UFO community, because I can do that writing a blog and everyone is reading it automatically, or many people. The trick is to get the young kids on board. They're interested in all these weird conspiracies that a lot of them aren't true. And if we could just get them some real conspiracies in their hands, they're going to latch onto it. And I think that's the point.
Wow. Good. Nicole, weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would like to add on to what Danny said a little bit too. Is I completely agreed with you the other night on Dolan when you said that for those of us in this younger generation, or even younger than the two of us, this really is not a political issue. We don't see it as like this, two-party system of ufology. Anytime this is spoken about in the public, it kind of levels that political platform for us anyways. And we don't really care that it's Marco Rubio or somebody else. It's just that it's being talked about. And aside from being so active in online communities, I am also kind of active in some local communities in a tri-state area as well. And what I have really noticed is, especially over the last 3 years, but more so over the last 6 months, that people in these groups that are discussing these topics day to day, they are starting to see that this is more of a public topic of conversation now. And they are more willing to come forth in their own communities, whether it's sky watching clubs or CE5 initiatives or other groups. And people are paying attention. It's not like this closeted, like Dungeons and Dragons group that you only, talk about with your 5 best friends anymore. Like, it honestly is more mainstream. And I work with a lot of younger people in my day job. And 15 years ago, I would hide in the back of my kitchen. And if anybody ever came up and talked to me about UFOs, I felt like it was so cool. I'm like, ooh, I found somebody. But now it's like, Danny's right. So many people just bring it up, and this younger generation, it's like they're indoctrinated already. They already believe it's true. They're like, yeah, well, I mean, Roswell, we've been following that forever. We know that it's covered up. We know these things. It's kind of self-evident to this younger generation, especially in these political times where we know there are Black projects hidden from us, and we know it's bad. It's not just in ufology, it's everywhere. And I think this is the topic that can bring both parties together, and not only both parties, but even science and spirituality. So that's my hope for where this is going. We all have our jobs to do. We need to keep doing it well. And the other thing I will add before we move on is, I'm getting approached by a lot of people that just say, oh, we've been down this before. We've seen this before. These things have happened, Condon reports and Project Blue Book and MJ whatever. We've seen this, it's bogus, it'll go away. And what I keep pointing out is, no, we may have seen elements of this before, the way information tries to get out, but there's definitely been an upgrade to the playbook. They've been smarter on how they're getting this information out, as in they need legislation to back it up. Otherwise, it's all just talk. And now we are finally seeing legislation like any social movement needs. It needs legislation. So.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Victor, weigh in. We're the old guys here. Are the young guys, young people right here?
Well, I may be a grayback, as someone alluded to earlier, but as far as I'm concerned, my mindset might be a whole lot younger than that. In any case, I want to go back to a couple of things that have been mentioned. I think one of the things that we need to do is let the Navy do its work. The Navy, as we all know, as far back as when Hillenkotter was first in charge of the CIA, he was the first one to mention in a high-level way that we need to have some sort of open discussion within governance about this whole issue. And he used the words behind the scenes. If you go back that far, I know Dave Scott mentioned the history of all of this, and I think Hillenkotter was one of the ones who saw the light at the end of the tunnel. And he opened the discussion way back then. And we all know that the Navy has been, if not in charge of this issue, one of the central, I guess, cohabitors with this information. And they need to do their work. And obviously, they're doing something very, very specific. They have an agenda in mind as to where this thing is going to go. Make no doubt about that. They know where this issue is going. So I think, first of all, we need to let the Navy do what they're doing and let things happen as they may. Now, the other thing that I think we need to be careful of is this whole idea behind To the Stars Academy. And I appreciate what they're doing, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. But the only critique that I would have is that could shut this whole issue down very, very quickly, is their emphasis on, or at least they're mentioning a little bit too much or too frequently, is the threat scenario. Everything seems to be couched in terms of what the technology might do in terms of weaponizing the UFO technology. I think that is a very, very scary possibility, that if the public gets a hold of that bone, they're going to chew on it for much longer than any other information that we have. So I think we have to be careful with that one. And I would admonish anyone, Chris Mellon or whoever else is in charge of getting information out, to really look hard at how they frame that whole threat scenario to the national security. Is this a threat to the national security? So that's something I think we really need to pay attention to. And I'm not sure what you do about that issue, is how he wants to couch it. But I think we need to pay attention to that one. And the last thing that I'll say as to where we need to go, and I'll mention MSNBC again. I mentioned it earlier, and I have the impression as a Canadian that, and I watch MSNBC and Fox News. I have them both on, and I watch them closely. They are leaders in media. There's absolutely no doubt about the fact that they are leaders in media. Whatever their message might be, you disagree or agree, whatever it happens to be. But people like Joe Scarborough and Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow, these are people who need to be plugged into this issue. Now, how do we do that? Do we get their fingers and put them in a light socket and say, oh, yes, I'm enlightened now? What do we do as activists to get these people engaged with this issue? And I'll go back to what Steve said earlier about Nick Pope being on Tucker Carlson 49 times. I think it's 51 now, Steve, actually. But the fact of the matter is, we need to get leadership in line within the UFO research community or the activist community, like Steve. And, Steve and I have had lots of conversations about this. We need to get someone with the credibility that Steve has, B, the work that he's done, and the foundational information with respect to the hearings that he had in 2013. I was there for all 5 days, and that is a benchmark in history. Now, we need to get the media to understand that this man brought forward incredible witnesses over 5 bloody days, and it was met with a whimper. That has to be changed. So I would suggest that somehow we advocate among MSNBC, Fox News, whomever, that Steve make a concerted effort, do whatever we have to do to get him on those kinds of programs. I can't do it. I don't have the background, the knowledge, and the intensity that Mr. Bassett has. I think we need to get some good people on these major media to wake people up, to give them the slap in the face that's needed, that this is a story. This is not a political story with respect to just the United States. This is a global issue. And once the human family realizes that, then I think we're going to move the ball forward a little bit more. And we can talk about legislation. We can talk about what Marco Rubio is doing. We can talk about that till the cows come home. But unless we get a major figure within the UFO research community, like Steve, to get onto these kinds of programs and really whack this thing to death so that they understand that they're missing the boat. And if they don't pay attention to it, they're going to be bypassed by somebody. And God unwilling that Fox News makes this the major issue. If they do, how will they frame it? And that's my big fear. So I'll leave it at that. And perhaps maybe we can have a discussion later on about that. So that's my feelings as to where we should go.
Beautiful. Thanks. Now, my third question, I'll just sort of open it up. Anyone wants to talk or wants to elaborate, because I know Melinda can talk about the threat issue.
Yeah, that's why I was raising my.
Yeah.
I'm unmuted.
Let me ask.
I was raising my hand about that before because I was going to comment on that.
Just let me ask the question, and then you can start by talking about the threat issue with Jim. I basically want to know, because during the comments they were mentioning that Ralph Blumenthal is actually interacting with all the people on the chat, and one of the things he says, they back off like they did the first one. Nobody is talking aliens. And I also want to bring up the Eric Davis said that the program was parked in 1989. They couldn't get anywhere with it. So we're talking about the second article. We're talking about the Wilson document. What do you think they have? What do you think is coming? What, in terms of what do you think the government has? What do you think they're covering up? And that's just a speculative question. Does the New York Times have this stuff, or how far are they going to go?
Who knows? I mean, of course, we all noted, we've already talked about it a bunch today, about how there was the crash retrieval language within this article. But yeah, what this article, what the Times has, who knows? My strong sense was right away that they probably had a lot more, and their editors made them dial it back. It was too much too soon, and or they didn't have the evidence, because I don't know about the rest of you guys, and maybe people can comment, but as I read it, I was like reading the language of frustration of not having the evidence to go further in this article. Like they made a point to make their frustration known, you know? So I heard that in there in the wording. Yeah, who knows what they have to go forward with. There were a couple of lines, and I'm sure all of you caught these too, that alluded to wording in the Wilson document, like we're going to take some of that wording and we're going to quote Eric saying it, and that they interviewed him again and he said that. I think whether it was Blumenthal and Keene giving a nod, or the editors giving a nod, or Eric Davis giving a nod to it deliberately, but by choosing to emphasize that wording, all of us who are ingrained in the whole I'll call it Davis notes because that's more accurate, but in the Wilson Davis notes, that looking at that, it's like, wait a second, they gave a nod to that for sure. I mean, the wording to me, I see Joe nodding there. I think it jumped out at me, and probably everyone else familiar with that.
I want to suggest another possibility, and we don't know what's going on inside the New York Times. Boy, don't we wish we did. You know, what do they know?
Bob has indicated some stuff. He sort of hinted that they were holding some stuff back that he had heard about.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about. I mean, one possibility is the editors say, wait a minute, we can't prove all this. Let's not pour all this out. We got to just stick with the minimal things we can absolutely verify. That's one possibility. Another possibility is, and if I owned the New York Times, this is the direction I would go. Wow, we got a ton of amazing stuff here. We're suffering financially terribly.
Yeah.
Let's maximize the revenue generation, the media attention, the Twitter buzz, the viral media that's going to go out, and spread it out over a little bit of time. That makes perfect business sense, and I don't fault them for it.
No,
I think it also makes some sense in terms of serving the readership.
Dave says no.
Once humanity realizes, and you know, for a lot of us, we already have, but once the planet can no longer ignore the fact that we're not alone in the universe, we're not the most intelligent thing out there. We haven't got the best technology that's out there. We probably got started a few billion years after the first guys got started. That's the Copernican revolution times 10,000. It changes the way we all view ourselves. So you might say, well, somebody in the New York Times who's got an interest not only in revenue maximization, because spreading this out is certainly there for that, but also in terms of like, maybe we better be a little gentle on our readers here. You know, let's gear this up. There's still parts of the planet that don't have electricity and running water. Are they ready for the reality that, you know, ET's out there with superliminal craft? One more thing I'd like, I think another tipping point, and boy, the historians are going to have fun writing about this issue, and they're going to quote Steve Bassett a lot, along with Grant Cameron and all you all. Probably not me so much. But when they write the history of this, I think there was another real tipping point, and that was Hal Puthoff at the Society for Scientific Exploration meeting in Las Vegas 2 years ago. I was there.
I was there too.
And I was going to read what he said that just blew me away. about metamaterials, because this is what Davis, the New York Times says, Davis says he said to classified briefings in the United States Senate. But here's what Hal said publicly. I'm choosing one example here, metamaterials for aerospace use. I'd like to talk about really fancy materials, but they are classified. However, there's a lot of materials that have been picked up and provided even in the public domain. So I'm going to give an example. And then he goes on and gives that example about what was called arts parts, and it was bismuth magnesium layering. Nobody could reproduce it on Earth, no lab, no national asset. Nobody could understand why anybody would want to put bismuth and magnesium together in a metamaterial. And then he goes on to say, until recently, we discovered it makes a very effective wave glide at terahertz frequencies. We only discovered that last year. This was Hal Puthoff in a public setting. And I recorded, I didn't record it. I got the AV guy in the back of the room to email me the recording that night because they had a no recording allowed policy there. And then I typed up the transcript and sent it off to Steve, and he put it up on his website a couple of days later. I think that was huge. There's Puthoff saying publicly what Davis may have been saying in a classified briefing. So
I'd like to make a couple of points. The publishers of the New York Times care about revenue. The editors and their reporters don't give a crap. What they want is two or more credible sources agreeing on the points that will go in the article. And if it makes money, great. If it doesn't, we got a great story. So I agree with that's what's going on with the editorial control.
I want to add one little element to that. When you see your buddy and staff being fired, there's a little bit more of a connection to revenues.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get that. I don't disagree that the New York Times, like every other newspaper in America, needs to find new ways to generate revenue. They all do.
I can tell you this. I can tell you this on how it works in a newsroom. When you have a major story that is going on, and I saw this happen in the newsrooms that I worked at in Vancouver, where if you have a major story that is breaking, what happens is a lot of times if there could be political or any type of law broken before the story actually makes the news, the editors and or news directors will actually contact the station's lawyers to have some sort of confirmation as to whether or not this article can run or this story can run, and what are the implications of everything that goes on. Now, that being said, getting to the New York Times article here about it being money, there was no immediate follow-up to that story in 2017. There was no immediate follow-up to this story today. There hasn't been a pattern of media follow-up in regards to the New York Times, and they have been pushing this further and further away each time the story comes out. So to say that it is about revenue, I have to respectfully disagree on that, because let's face it, the 2017 article was one of the highest revenue generated stories and papers since 9/11 that the New York Times had. They didn't do a follow-up, which I found very, very strange, because when you have something that large, why wouldn't they take advantage of it for the financial implications? All right. Now, that tells me one of two things. Number one, they want to throw the story out there because it is a big story just to see where it goes. But it tells me more, this is very based on legalities on what they can and cannot report. We also must remember that Leslie Keene has been involved in this for a long time. All right. She worked for Robert Bigelow. She has connections all over this. They are dictating to her when they want those stories to come out. I heard that from one of my sources who is very close to that, who wanted to break a story but couldn't because they wanted to give it to Keene and Blumenthal. And when you have that type of narrative being controlled, that is what is the actual dangerous part about this. And that goes back to what I said earlier in regards to the fact that they don't give a care about us in ufology. They don't care about the radio shows outside of one of them. They don't care about doing interviews with anybody outside of whoever is mainstream and popular. So what they're doing is they're taking this entire narrative, they're controlling it for their own benefit, and to hell with the money, to hell with the public opinion. They're going to bring it out as they want to. And that's the dangerous part of this all.
Okay, I want to make one more major point. There's this constant refrain about threat, threat, threat. Let me explain to you. A Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, they care a whole lot when an entire carrier battle group comes back home and complains bitterly that they were overflown in controlled airspace by hundreds of vehicles, some of which came down on these weird spheres around cubes, and it caused many dozens of near mid-air collisions. This is a damn threat. It's not a fake, it's a threat. Until you know why they're buzzing your airplanes and almost colliding with them, going into controlled airspace, showing up at cap points, which is the assembly points, before the ships communicate to the pilots where these assembly points are, that implies they're inside our communication systems. These are a threat. It's bullshit to say that they're not a threat, because they are.
Let me push back on that just for a moment, Bob. Not that I disagree with you, because they don't know what they are. That's the whole fact of the matter. They have no idea what these things are. So
that makes them a threat.
Well, okay, fine. That's fine. I don't want to get into that debate. But how, I guess my question is, if this whole threat scenario is played along as you described it, and if the Navy does come out and say it very specifically as you've described it, how will the public interpret whatever information we, who may know a little bit more, or at least feel a little bit more about what this is all about globally in terms of the cosmic reality, how will the public interpret that whole threat scenario? That's my question to you. How will Joe Public interpret that threat? And
very badly.
Badly, well, because, and I want to remind you once again, the National Defense Authorization Act is what's funding this. They're going to view it as a threat until they determine what it is.
Well, I can tell you at least what Jim said to me about where the To the Stars lands on this, and only because we talked about this at great length, more than once, but in the 2-hour conversation I had with him rather extensively. And first off, he says that they at To the Stars, and everyone always remember, when you hear To the Stars, it's not just the public face, it's a bigger group. Jim said that to me repeatedly, so please always think of it that way. But he said, we know it's not a threat as far as there's not been aggressive action. Most of the aggressive action has been taken by us, meaning humans, in the past. But what you just said, you're not wrong, Bob, in this way. Getting this passed, getting the funding, the intelligence bill, getting the senators to care, and certainly the Navy caring, is based upon the fact that something in controlled airspace, in military airspace, operating on its own, doing so with impunity, yes, that's a threat. I mean, so that this is being couched in this language to get it passed. Okay, Jim made that very, very clear to me. That's how you get everyone in the government, surface level, and in the military and in the intelligence community to give a so it's being put in that language. But he said he wants it to be very clear that that's not necessarily To the Stars' view, that they realize, and they should be concerned for those reasons, for the very reasons you just said, Bob. It has to be perceived and cared about in that way. Like, why should they matter? Was it Project Blue Book famously always was saying, we realized this wasn't a threat and we dropped it. At least that was the excuse. Well, they're saying that doesn't fly anymore. It is a problem. It is a concern. But again, To the Stars' personal view is not so much that in other words, I'm just going to quote Jim, we know it's not a threat. We know it's not a threat. It's not acted in a threatening way. The others don't seem to be, threatening, that kind of thing. But it's how you work with who they're working with and how you get them to care enough to do something about it, to find out what's in those stovepipes. What do the basis, the 180-day report, everybody needs to read what the Senate report going to Congress says and what they're actually requesting in the billing. It's that they want the director of national intelligence overseeing it to say, what does every branch of the intelligence community know about this? What do they know? What's in what's called the stovepipes? What's inside the inside upstream of each intelligence branch? What are they doing about this? What's there? And let's look at how have they looked at this, for how long, etc. And then, oh gosh, it says internet connection unstable. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Grant, you can hear me okay?
You're okay. You're okay. Keep going.
Okay. So to look at that and say, what is there? And then to ask the next question, what does each one know? How long have they known? What is the historical data there, etc. And get into all those things later. But initially, what has each intelligence community done about this, and what kind of projects and stuff have they had? So that's what they hope is in that first report. And he says Congress is going to more clearly define that, so that could change. But as it's written now, that's kind of what they're looking for. And that was the intent of the senators. But again, going back to the reason I jumped in right now is To the Stars says, we do not believe that this is a threat, as far as there's no real evidence for threat. But you got to act like Bob just said, that something in your airspace has to be dealt with in that way till you know for sure. Because while there is this knowledge that they know that this is extraterrestrial, that they also can't rule out foreign governments and what they know, and that has to be looked at in the mix. So and even though this report and the findings and the results are supposed to be made public and unclassified, that's how it's worded in the 8 bullet points, unclassified. But they also know that there's that classified annex, because there's the parts, whatever you tell the American people, whatever you make unclassified, you're telling the rest of the world, including the adversaries. And so there are certain things you don't want in their hands. Come on, we're not all, we're not kindergartners here. We know, and there's an understanding for what some of that might be. But the major information about what's known and how long it's known is supposed to come out. And I mean, whether it will or not, none of us know, but God, we certainly, hope so. We certainly hope it's in there, and we hope it's in that report. And Jim says the folks at To the Stars and Chris Mellon are hell bent, on keeping that. Like we need it to go there. We need it to go there. And he stresses that to me, that they want it to absolutely go there, to get into those things later. But he said that's down the road. But initially, it's done in steps, and it's, he said after the first 180-day report, then after that, is it monthly reports, yearly reports? Is it weekly reports? What happens after that? Then the next step. And he said, we're going to push it, and we're working with the Navy to push this all along the way. But I just wanted to clarify that To the Stars, and I'm always checking, is he telling Melinda what Melinda wants to hear, or is this what they really feel? And I question him about that. We have tough conversations, and I say, don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what you guys actually feel, and I question everything. I don't want everyone to think, oh, she just believes everything they say. No, I question it. But all I'm doing is I'm reporting back, this is what he and I discussed, and he stressed it and seemed adamant about it.
Which raises the question I asked you, Melinda, when you asked me, when you first had the encounter with Jim, you asked me, what do you want to ask? And I said, ask Jim whether it's constitutional. And that's a question maybe people can look at. Danny talked about it. Is there a legal activity going on? Is there a breakaway civilization? Have they got control of this thing? or is there some rogue group running around spending money who aren't elected? And
Yeah, I mean, him and I have talked about it, and yeah, he says, yeah, they know that's there. They know that's there. But you know, again, everything they're doing is not going there yet. They got to start with, what does the intelligence community know? You know, you start with square one, and what's in the SAPs you got to discuss before you get into what's in the USAPs. You know, so it's like this is where you start. And but do they know that's there? Yeah, and he says that kind of stuff drives Chris Mellon crazy, because you know that part of this is unconstitutional, part of this is illegal. They said that needs to end.
I want to speak to that for a moment, if I could. I think the Pentagon Papers is a great example from history of what we might see play out next. If you remember, the Nixon administration was going to sue the New York Times, and the point about editors having to get their attorneys to review things because the financial liability that may be associated with lawsuits coming from publishing something that you could be sued over is very real. And that's part of the existential crisis for keeping your newspaper in business. Well, with the Pentagon Papers, the Nixon administration was going to go right after the New York Times for publishing those materials. It was illegal, or it may have been, quote, legal, but it's certainly not moral, certainly not constitutional in the broader sense of what ought to be legal and illegal. And that's what's happening right now with this issue. It would take one senator or one member of the House to determine that what's happening here is extra constitutional and illegal, and to go on the floor, and on that floor, they're protected from any kind of arrest or legal action for revealing whatever they choose to reveal, and do what Senator Gravel did. Read it into the congressional record, it becomes public domain, and then the media can run with it. That's how the Pentagon Papers got into the public domain after the New York Times.
Thank you, Danny Sheehan.
Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you, Danny Sheehan. So do we have a patriot left? Someone who's willing to risk their life, their fortune, and their sacred honor, who realizes that what's happening here is extra constitutional and can make that happen. And that's why Senator Gravel remains a hero of mine, because he was one of those guys willing to do that in the best tradition of what this country, unlike every other nation state on earth, you know, was founded on, people who were willing to take that kind of sacrifice.
Can I chime in about caring? About caring about the UFO community? You know, they weren't very vocal in 2017 when they first came out. Now they are. They're doing TTSA talks. They're taking questions from the UFO community. Christopher Mellon's on Twitter. They're giving comments and interviews to Black Vault, myself, Unidentified Website, Tom Rogan, MJ Benias, Tim McMillan, Mike DeMonte, and that's just off the top of my head. So they're talking to a lot of people now. They're pretty open.
Mellon had an Ask Me Anything on Twitter.
Exactly. So, you know, they're pretty open, and they do care very much about the UFO community. They care what we think, and but of course their mission and their goal is to get to the public.
Now I had a question for Bob. Now I forgot what the question was. Okay. We're talking about classification, about standing on the floor of the Senate and reading papers. Eric Davis.
Totally legal.
Okay, but Eric Davis has come out and talked about crash material.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah. So, what do you think, he's getting permission to do this, or what do you think?
I don't see how Eric would risk his job and his security clearance at Aerospace Corporation if he had not been given clearance to speak. I believe that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, his staffers, and the Director for National Intelligence has okayed Eric to say certain words. The exact words he used had to have been cleared, or because he is an active member of the intelligence community sitting at Aerospace Corporation, which is the major federally funded research and development center that advises the United States Air Force, the National Reconnaissance Office, etc. It's just a major deal for Eric to say this stuff. It is earth-shaking to me, earth-shaking that Eric said these things, because it meant it was cleared from on high, or he never would have done it.
There you go. Thanks for that. We got about 10 minutes left, and apparently Tucker Carlson's going on at 18 minutes past the hour with the UFO story. So anybody want to wrap up and say something that hasn't been said yet?
Eric Davis has been commenting on a lot of this stuff for years, the crash retrievals. It's just good to see him now in a mainstream article saying it. But he's been saying it to Alejandro Rojas and other people in interviews. So I think that's really cool. And once again, it was like we knew it first. You know, we knew it because Eric Davis was saying it. We knew it because Elizondo was saying it. So, but just the fact that it goes into a mainstream media newspaper, and then now the public gets to know what we know.
Exactly, Danny.
I would also say
saying it on the down low, to people in the community is one thing, but stating it in an interview with Blumenthal and Keene, knowing it's going to go in the Times, that has to be with approval, and the Times' willingness to say it has to feel like the Times editors felt like they could. So everything's been green lighted, apparently.
And for Joe Buchman, you were listening to Hal Puthoff give the speech. Did he not say at the beginning, "I've never talked about UFOs, but now I'm not going to go. They won't throw me in jail," or something to that effect?
Yeah, I've got the quote right here. If you want, I can read it to you. He he was getting the Dinsdale Award from SSE for being one of the founders of the International Remote Viewing Association and for his work with unidentified aerial phenomenon. And here's what he actually said. The third area, unidentified aerial phenomenon, I've not published anything in. Why? Because the program I was involved in the Pentagon and in the intelligence community has been top secret behind the scenes. And only recently has there been release of information about the program. So this is the first chance that I've had to actually appear before the public and speak about details of the program and not go to jail.
Yeah.
Wow. And to be in that audience, and to me, it was like a chill went through the room.
Oh, yeah.
I got up to a mic and I asked him a question later about the citizens hearing, and he was especially impressed, he said, with Bob Salas's testimony. And then I caught him in private. And I said, Dr. Puthoff, I've had a lifelong interest in this. And I can't understand why it's such a huge secret without revealing anything you may know about that. Can you tell me, if I were to be fully read into the program and somebody were to share with me the reasons it's been kept so secret, would I be very likely to agree with them? I mean, is there a really good reason for keeping this secret that if I were fully in that world, I would appreciate and join in keeping it secret? I asked something like that. I don't remember my question exactly, but I remember his response very clearly. He took a step back, he looked at the floor, he looked up and he said, well, Joe, I don't think the reasons are as valid as the gatekeepers think they are. And I called Bassett. I don't know if Steve remembers. I called you from the hallway 5 minutes later. And Steve said, go back in and ask him who the gatekeepers are. Yeah, it was that to be at that SSE conference in Vegas and then to get the tour of Bigelow Aerospace, and by random chance, seemingly, my tour guide was Com Kelleher. So what a wild weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. I was there, Joe. I'm with you. Yes, it was.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is thank you, Grant. I'm reading for the first time ever Valet's, basically it's his diary, Forbidden Science, Volume 4.
Yeah, Volume 4 is like...
Yeah, everybody under the bus. That's the way I
read that with the Wilson document at the same time.
Yeah, Volume 4 is amazing. Volume 3 is good, but Volume 4 is like knock it out of the park.
Yes.
Yeah. He's very open. What's the quote he has in the beginning of the book? He talks about you living a life and you gotta say what's real or something. He has a famous quote that I quoted from the very front of the book.
I'm not going to find that as quickly, but I will say that I read this book the way I read a lot of books, and maybe it's the academic in me. I turned to the index first. I looked up John Alexander and read every section where he was mentioned.
That's how I did the same thing.
I did the same thing. And then I've been emailing John. John's still like, Wilson's all a fake. I'm like, okay, when was it faked? And he's like, oh, you're conflating issues. I'm like trying to make this as simple as possible. But at any rate, fascinating book, especially knowing, some of the people in it.
Yeah, he talks about everybody there. Green, Eric Davis. He basically, and that's what you do, is you go through the index and you look at all the, what Linda and I call the Avery, the working group. And you see, and he basically talks about everything, how Bigelow started NIDS, the first speech he gave, what he talked about, what it was all about. Fascinating insight on.
Ingo Swann and Axelrod is in here.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind about those journals, I've ran into this writing blogs and trying to quote them. I'll contact Valet or other people. Not everyone in those journals remembers what happened. And they don't always agree with it. A lot of times they've changed their mind. So that's just kind of a caveat to those journals. They're kind of snapshots in time. And when I go back and try to get comments on some of those quotes in those books, people don't remember saying it. They don't agree with it now. So it poses some problems.
Well, you feel like it was literally his diary where he was taking notes every day. I mean, on conversations he had, and then eventually, edited up and published the diaries. I mean, it's fascinating, and it was probably true at the moment. It reads like that's what he wrote that day because that's what was said that day.
Right. Yeah. Snapshot.
How convenient that they now go, oh, well, I don't remember, or I don't feel that way now. How convenient. It's probably what happened at the time.
Let me jump in real quick on this one. I'll say, yes, this is published journals that he wrote at the time as they were happening. Just like we take Eric Davis notes. He wrote the notes as they were happening. And Bob McGwier, just like we're taking your add-on, that you also have a diary that corroborates this as well. It's not something you don't go back and reflect. That's an autobiography. That's when you reflect on your life. A journal is not that. So
that raises an interesting question. Did Davis openly take notes while in that car chatting with the vice admiral?
I think he recorded it.
Yeah, me too. It reads like somebody typed a transcript of and then did he record it openly or
either that or he has an eidetic memory?
Wilson at one point says, what are you going to do with that? Like referencing a thing to say, if that's an exact quote, to say, what are you going to do with that? So that's like either he was writing notes and what are you going to do with that, meaning the written notes, or what are you going to do with that? The recording was how I read it. That's just how I read it.
I want the recording.
Don't we all?
Let me end it here, and let me end by reading Jacques Vallée's quote. This is at the end of the introduction to volume 4. He says, as Albert Camus advised us, if a man wants to be recognized, he must simply tell who he is. If he remains silent or lies, he dies alone, and everything around him is destined to unhappiness. On the contrary, if he tells the truth, he will no doubt still die, but he will have helped others and himself in life.
I should also say that Albert Camus also said that the ultimate reality is suicide.
Yes, he did. In A Stranger.
Yeah, that's right. Could I just make one more point?
Yes.
What are your plans for next time, Grant, for something like this? Just want to pick your brain on that.
Well, it depends what comes up. Like we're doing panels on different things. I think Richard Dolan is doing panels next week. I think he's going to do the same thing. But when, if another second article comes out, I may do the same thing again, depending what's in that second article. If it's the Wilson document, because we already did a panel on the Wilson document, we may do another one. So if you're available, we can do it. And
sure. Would you mind if I invited a couple of journalists? Try to get a couple of journalists to come on with us?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Especially if they're going to publish and spread it.
yes.
Exactly.
Linda said something earlier I want to reinforce as well, which is get hold of your local congressperson, United States senators. There's 3 people in each state. And you could get other congressmen outside of your district and urge them, to put pressure on these hearings actually happening. They happen over in the Senate. They can also happen over in the House.
I think you all should look at what Dave Scott sent around. He sent how many MPs did you send it to, Dave?
I sent it to 9 MPs, members of Parliament for our American listeners, and from 3 different parties here in Canada. I sent 3 to the members of the Liberal Party, 3 to the Conservative Party, and 3 to the New Democratic Party. And I sent the first batch on July 1st to see if I could gauge any reaction to anything. And I tagged Victor and Chris Rakowski and Grant Cameron in on that. And then last night, I did the exact same thing after not hearing anything from these politicians at all. But I mean, right now with a potential scandal going on, I'm sure their last thing they're talking about is UFOs. But I mean, the fact is, I'm waiting for a response. I'm not waiting for some secretary or to get back to me and say, hey, you know, it's going to be a while. I want a response, and I will keep resending those emails. And as you can see, you know, even though I haven't tagged a lot of people in there, you can see that, you know, I'm just going to continue the email process. Eventually, somebody has to answer. Eventually. And the silly part about it is, if they don't answer, it's still a good story, because we can now say politicians are ignoring the UFO topic.
Beautiful. Let me ask Joe a question on this. Having run and stuff like that, is it better to send a written letter or an email? Because what I heard is if you send emails, they get like 30,000 emails a day or whatever. But if you send a written letter, someone actually has to open the thing.
Well, yeah, no, I'll tell you what's best. These guys are back in their districts. You go to one of their town halls. They're very poorly attended generally. Meet them in person and, you know, make sure they hear it. I think emails are probably relatively worthless for most members of the House. You might want to also look at getting hold of people who are at risk of not getting reelected, which is a relatively small number. If you know you're just going to get reelected, you don't have to give very much attention to your constituents. By the way, there's a great documentary about AOC and how she won that election. And her opponent was just the third most powerful guy in the House and way overconfident. So look for those people, but I would say go meet them in public. They're out in the districts, or you know, they're doing stuff now with Zoom and other formats that you have a chance of actually being heard vocally, one-on-one.
And understand that the important person to reach is their most important staffer.
Yeah,
especially if you know their staffer
right.
is interested in this topic. Engage with the staffer, and they will grab the Congress critter and help them.
You know, Bob, let me just comment on that, Bob. I called Mark Warner's constituency office. I'm trying to think, just before Christmas last year. And I spoke with a young fellow. His name was Kevin. And he was, like you say, he's a staffer. Whether he's the most important one or not, I'm not quite sure. But this guy was totally engaged with the whole thing. Now, what he did after the fact and what I asked him to do, and because I'm not a constituency, constituent member from Mark Warner's, I guess, district, but he was definitely listening to me, and he was definitely interested in what I was saying. And you just tell by someone's tone of voice that they're not trying to yank your chain. They're really genuinely interested. And he said he would take it forward. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, I tend to want to talk to people rather than sending emails.
Yes. If you could talk to an important staffer, that's the way in.
Yeah, I had the chief of staff of the Republican I ran against in 2008. His wife told me that she voted for me. Yeah, he was going to win anyway, but it was like sending a message like, we want to hear that guy's views more often. We'll throw a vote that way. One other quick thing, Grant and everybody, the New York Times is in New York City. The other thing in New York City is the United Nations. Are those guys going to go, wait a minute, what have the Americans been doing here? Is there any buzz about that in terms of people that are going to want to have folks out investigating what's actually happening? You got the media, you've got members of Congress, the United States Senate, their staffs. Is the UN worth anything?
How long is a piece of string?
Yeah. I've generated total silence. That's what I get.
Everybody's thinking about it.
Who knows?
Okay, thank you everybody for joining, and hopefully we can do this again. If there hopefully is another article shortly, because the rumor was definitely 2 articles, not 1. So we've seen 1, and let's see what happens with the second one. And maybe what Danny was hinting at, that it maybe have to do with the Wilson document.
That would be amazing.
Thanks a lot, Grant. Really
Okay,
appreciate your
thank you.
efforts.
Thank you so
Grant.
much,
Thank you,
Grant.
Grant.
Thank
And
you,
thank you
Grant,
for
for doing this.
Let's
Thank
do
you
it
for
again.
doing this and for having me. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.